topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity, equity, and inclusion educator. Usually my guests I feature share different aspects of demographic identity or different perspectives that broaden our ordinary thinking. And occasionally, I really like to highlight solutions to the intense climate change our world is clearly experiencing. If you're paying attention to natural disasters that seem to be speeding up and happening much more frequently than they used to, I really love to dedicate some time to climate resilience programs or initiatives to slow down climate change. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before I introduce my guest, I just want to mention to any listeners or viewers interested in my programs that are related to how we can learn to step out of conditioned biases and develop new neural pathways to change our attitudes and behaviors. It's entirely possible. We just recondition ourselves to do something that is much more inclusive. And that includes things that improve environment too. So if you're interested in contacting me about some of my programs, I do one-on-one coaching, group coaching, I teach classes, I lead trainings in various places and online. You can just contact me on Instagram at It's Your Voice Show. And that's how you can ask me about my programs. So today, my guest is Doug Cobold. He's the executive director of the California Product Stewardship Council. And before I say more about him, I wanted to let the people who are viewing know that Doug will be off camera today, but we have some beautiful diagrams that our wonderful engineer will be showing as Doug explains certain aspects of the California Stewardship Product Council and different programs that they do. But let me say a little bit more about his voice. And the first line, honestly, it came from Doug. Doug has been talking trash for over 29 years. He's the executive director for the California Product Stewardship Council, and he's held that position since 2018. He previously spent 18 years with Sacramento County as a program manager, and over 2 years in consulting, over 5 years with the Yolo County as an operations manager. He's got a bachelor's degree in civil engineering with a minor in planning from California State University at Chico. And he finally, let me let you know, he serves as several things. One is the chair of the Solid Waste Association of North America, California chapters, and the Legislative Task Force. He's an elected board member of the California Resource Recovery Association, and he is the vice chair of CalRecycle statewide illegal dumping technical advisory committee. So yeah, no wonder you've been talking trash for 29 years, Doug. I'm sorry we can't see your face, but many people are listening on the radio anyway, and they wouldn't be able to see the screen. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Bahia. I'm honored to be here and be able to talk with you and your audience today. I apologize. It's my technical difficulty at my end that my camera's decided to stop working after going all day long. Apparently it needed a rest.
I
So
guess. Yep, these things happen.
yes, they do.
So you gave me 3 beautiful topics to ask you about, because I was not at all educated about what product stewardship was. But before we do that, before we ask DJ to put up some of the diagrams for viewers, can you just sort of give like what is the overall goal of the California Product Stewardship Council?
Absolutely, yes. So we're a nonprofit 501c3, and that means we're here for public benefit only. And so everything we do has got to be beneficial to the general public. We're not a membership organization, et cetera. So, and the whole goal in life of we affectionately call ourselves CPSC, or the California Product Stewardship Council. The whole goal in life for CPSC is to try and get the manufacturers of products that we use every day, we buy every day off the shelf or at your Best Buys or wherever you're buying your products, to try and get those manufacturers to think ahead, to think about the end of life of those products. Because when they're designing these products, they're designing them for a number of things. Ease for them to construct them so they're competitive. They're thinking about shelf appeal. How does this thing look on the shelf so I can sell more of it? Are they worried about how long it lasts? Because the reality is, if it lasts a somewhat reasonable amount of time and we have to replace it, they get to sell more. And so there's kind of a disincentive for them to actually do what we were all used to in the past, which is you bought something, it lasted a long time, and maybe you did other things with it. Maybe you passed it down to other people or to your children, and they used it after you. But we've kind of gotten away from that as time has progressed, and we've seen products that are not lasting as long, not repairable. And I'll be talking about a few of these items here shortly, but that's kind of where we're at. We're trying to get, and the only way to get the producers to actually want to do a better job on the front end is to try and make them pay for it on the back end. Because right now, everything that we generate, every product we buy, if it goes into the recycling or the garbage, we pay for it at the curbside, and then our local government jurisdictions have to deal with making sure it gets taken care of properly. And so they're charging us for those costs. So ultimately, we're paying for it already anyway, but the designers have no reason to change what they're doing to make those products better. And so that's where we come in, and that's where we, it's a term called extended producer responsibility. And it's extending that responsibility of those end-of-life products costs onto those producers to get them to rethink.
That is great. To give that incentive and to point out to producers and to hold them accountable for what they're producing and all the waste they're generating, and just to raise awareness around that. So the diagram that strikes me as be great to talk about first is the first one you sent me, which is the DR3. And DJ, can you put that diagram up and Doug, could you please, remember some of our people are just listening on the radio, so can you read?
Absolutely, be happy
all
to
of that?
describe. This is a new campaign we've launched recently. It's called DR Cubed, and what it stands for is durable, reusable, repairable, recyclable. So these were principles in the past, principles that manufacturers used to make products so that they could ensure that they could sell them. Well, as I mentioned just earlier, their incentive is not to make these things last forever anymore, because if they make them last forever, then they don't sell more of them. And so ultimately they could put themselves out of business. And so they have, manufacturers in general have decided we're going to just make them last, again, a reasonable amount of time, maybe, and then it'll get replaced or it'll be outdated. Like our cell phones are a perfect example. Your cell phone, how quickly does your cell phone become outdated? And what do you do with that old cell phone? Why can't it function for 10 years? Why does it have to be good for maybe 3 or 4 years at the most before it's time to replace it, or even shorter time? And I'll get into that part about repairability. But so we decided to kind of follow the European Union's. They're working towards this over there. They've got this idea out there of the durable, reusable, repairable, recyclable, and they also have energy efficient in their campaign. But they haven't finalized their campaign. So we decided, okay, at CPSC, let's get this going. Let's get this rolling here in America, certainly here in California, and see if we can start using this as kind of a dialogue with the manufacturers to get them to start rethinking how they design their products. And so DR Cubed is our latest and greatest campaign.
And what kind of responses are you getting from producers?
Well, so the manufacturers are not so inclined to want to change their ways. They've been doing business a certain way. When you try to encourage them to change their ways, you'll get a different kind of response. I can cite a perfect example that just recently happened. CPSC sponsored a bill in the California legislature that's now sitting on the desk for the governor to sign, and that is the single-use 1-pound propane cylinders. We're all familiar with the camping-style propane cylinders we take for our Coleman stoves or Coleman lanterns, those type of things. There was zero incentive for the only manufacturer in North America to make those cylinders to change their ways and make something refillable. Even though there are refillables available on the market, they can't compete against the cheap single-use product. And so when we started this bill, they fought us. They were in opposition of our bill. And we set up a ban of their product to force that same organization, that same industry, actually in that company, to make refillable 1-pound propane cylinders. Much like what they already do with many of their other cylinders. Many of their other cylinders, like your barbecue size, they make them and they are refillable. They have never been single use. But until you get an entity, a business entity, to rethink what they're going to do, they will not change. And this was a perfect example where the industry did not want, this particular company did not want to change their ways because they make way too much profit off the single-use cylinders. And so this is where you can run into that buzzsaw, and then you got to fight your way back out. And so we did with this particular bill. It is on the governor's desk for signature.
Wow. How long did it take to get to the governor's desk?
Well, we've been working on this program, a campaign called Refill Your Fun, and you can find it at refillyourfun.org, and I'll explain all about the refillables for the 1-pounders. We've been working on that since 2015. So wow. We've been working on the product for 7 years, trying to encourage this kind of behavior change. And finally, this year, we felt that there's enough of a refillable infrastructure and exchange infrastructure, kind of like what you already have for the barbecue cylinders. If you're familiar with the Blue Rhino model, where you can go take your 5-gallon, 20-pound cylinder in and get it, just exchange it for a full one. The same thing can be done for the 1-pounders. And we finally have a really good exchange model that's starting to function in California, but it's still being held back by this single use. And so we said this was the year. And so it only took us the 1 year. And we can't believe it ourselves that it only took us 1 year, and we actually got this bill through. It was a lot of work to get it up there because we didn't want to ban a product without a plan for replacement. And that is the refillable option and the exchange option. And so this was the year we felt it's time to go after these cylinders. They've had enough time to change their ways. They didn't want to do it voluntarily. So we came in and we said, okay, you're going to do it by force. And I know that company has already begun looking at creating their refillables instead of their single use, because they knew this bill was going to get through, and it has. Wow.
So often in our history, we have to force accountability. Wow, good work. And now let's just try to keep up with the speed of the climate change, right?
Absolutely. Well, and so this is where it ties into climate change. If you think about those 1-pound propane cylinders, so it's a perfect example again, it's a pound of metal, of sheet metal, that is then braze welded together and then forms that cylinder. Then they fill it with gas, and then they truck it from the Midwest all the way over to California, for example. So there's all the GHG, or greenhouse gas emissions, that are related to making the cylinders, filling the cylinders, transporting them all the way to California. Where with the refillables, it's 2 pounds of metal. So yes, you have some more GHGs related to the extra metal that had to be created to make the cylinder. To make the cylinder, the GHGs are the same to assemble it. So then it becomes just, where does it have to be transported? Well, it will take one trip into California if it's not already made in California. And then it will stay in California, and it will never leave California. And so you won't be making the cylinder over and over again like what happens with the single use, because you make it if it gets recovered, then they degas it, and then they have to break it down, and then they melt it down and turn it into more metal. So there's a big process there where if you're, then that's where the reusables come in, is because you can use the reusables for 10 years, up to 10 years before it has to be recertified as a tank. And you could probably use it for 20 years. It just depends on how often you use it, how much it's been worked. But we know they'll last at least 10 years. And so you've just replaced, if you just use one single use cylinder a year, you've just replaced 10 of them with one. And that's a huge greenhouse gas savings, which that's where it relates to climate change and how we're going to help to save the earth a little bit more just with this one change.
That's fantastic. And I so appreciate the depth of thinking and the details that are behind that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where our DR Cube works, is trying to work in that space and figure out where we can go. And so what I'll do is I'll explain a little bit more about the durable, reusable, repairable, recyclable slogan. And basically what it is, first and foremost, we want source reduction. It's called source reduction. Don't make the product to begin with. Or if you're going to make it with as little material as you possibly can, because that's less natural resources or emissions that are going to be needed to create that product. And so if you make it durable, it's going to last longer. That means you're not going to replace it as often. So you're already doing source reduction because you're now avoiding making new products to replace that last one you had. Now, what if you're done using it? What if you don't have any use for it anymore? It should be reusable. You should be able to pass it down to somebody else, either to your own family or to a friend, or put it out there in the thrift stores, whatever, so that someone else it'll be valuable to them and they can continue to use it. And again, if it's durable, it will continue to live for a long time and be useful. When it breaks, and a perfect example of that is our cell phones. Our cell phones are a wonderful device. We all rely on them nowadays. Back in the day, when the battery went bad on a cell phone, you could pull the battery out and put a new one in. There was not a problem. But the cell phone manufacturers responded to consumer demand. We wanted a cell phone that if we dropped it in the toilet, if we went into the lake with it or the swimming pool with it, it wasn't a dead phone anymore. It was sealed up, watertight, so you couldn't destroy the electronics inside. So what the cell phone manufacturers industry decided to do, this was their decision point, they decided to encase the entire phone, including the battery, into the sealed unit. So therefore, now if your battery goes bad, you can't get it out. You can't repair it. You as a consumer, you probably can't even get a repair shop to repair it, because as soon as you break that case open, you violated the warranty of the phone. And so they unfortunately chose the path of design for obsolescence here, because the minute phone battery dies, the phone is dead and you have to get a new one, which lets them sell more cell phones. It's kind of this cyclic issue that goes around. And so what we're trying to do under the repairable is say, okay, manufacturers of cell phones, you should have made a better choice. You should have sealed everything but that battery in. They could have put in provisions and conditions into the phone itself that if it got into the water, the battery would either discharge or disconnect, but it would not have killed the whole phone. And you could just replace the battery or just pull it out, dry it out, and go on like we used to. And so it was a choice that they made. And this is where it needs to be more repairable. If your microwave breaks, you should be able to fix it. It should be reasonable enough for your average consumer to be able to fix it, or certainly a repair technician to fix it, and it costs less to fix that device than to buy a new one, because that's where another part comes in. It is crazy that most of the devices we buy today, it costs way more to fix them than to replace them. And so this gets down to the repairability of it. How easy should it be to repair it? And then finally, if you can't repair it, then it ought to be recyclable. There are so many products out there that we can't recycle. We call it wish cycling. We wish it could be recycled. We put it in the blue bin and we hope that someone's going to recycle it. The reality is a lot of that material does not get recycled because it's just not recyclable. A perfect example of that would be when you buy a product in a PET, or I don't even remember the name of the resin, but it's the like your plastic water bottles, that type of resin. When you have a case, you encase a product in that, and then there's a sleeve, a cardboard sleeve in there that has all the print for the shelf appeal. How do you get that apart? If you as a consumer don't take that piece of cardboard out of that plastic sleeve that held that product, and you leave it together, it's actually contamination because the material recovery facilities will not take it out. They don't have the time and it's not worth their effort. So that piece of packaging will go down the line and end up in the landfill. So again, here's where the packaging designers need to think a little differently about what they do. Make it so when you open up that package, you can easily get that cardboard sleeve out and recycle both the cardboard and the plastic at the same time, rather than having it all going in the landfill. And so that's where the recyclability comes in. How recyclable is that product at end of life?
This is so refreshing to hear, because I remember it was unbelievable when like you couldn't buy a new battery for a phone. Like, what? You need a whole new phone? Like,
exactly.
That whole designing for obsolescence was so upsetting, because we knew that was not necessary.
Absolutely. So I don't know if you want to move on to the next graphic. I think it might be a good transition point.
Be great.
To talk about extended producer responsibility and product stewardship. And so here's one thing that, again, when I talked about our introduction for CPSC, this is where we focus. We focus on what we call the stewardship spectrum. We actually have trademarked this graphic and the name Stewardship Spectrum, or we're service marketing it. We're going to probably trademark it soon, but it is copyrighted. But so what this does is this is kind of a graphic representation of what the difference is between extended producer responsibility, or EPR, and product stewardship, because in our industry right now, these two terms are used interchangeably, and they should not be, because true extended producer responsibility is what I mentioned earlier, where we've got the manufacturers taking responsibility for the end of life of those products that they create, meaning they collect them, they cover the cost of the collection, they cover the cost of recycling them, they cover pretty much any of the costs that are associated with the end of life of that product. If they are paying for the end of life, they may change how they design it. We as consumers are going to pay for it no matter what, whether we pay for it in an increased point of sale cost because they've embedded the cost of the end of life into the original price of the product. If it's small enough, they may absorb the price of the end of life, and then we won't see the increase, and that's always a good thing. But if they are having to drive up their prices in order to cover the costs of the product at the end of life, they're more likely to make that design change to bring their cost of product back down. And so they feel the pinch. Now, on the other end of that spectrum is the product stewardship side, which means that there is somebody funding the end of life of the cost of those products. Somebody is running the program, and somebody is giving it oversight. And typically there's little to no funding coming out of the manufacturer. So again, we get back to this idea of, okay, well, they are wanting to, we want them to change their design, but if they have no skin in the game, if they have no financial risk, why would they? They can just go business as usual. And so that's where product stewardship comes in and says, okay, well, typically it's a visible fee. So if you look in California, we have the mattress program, the carpet program, and the paint program. Those all have visible fees at the check stand that get paid to an organization that then runs the recovery of those products and gets them recycled. But again, it's us paying that visible fee. So there's zero incentive for the industry to change anything they're doing when they manufacture those products to begin with. And then somewhere in the middle, we have a few other types of programs, like our bottle bill program for our bottles and cans. There is, it's run by CalRecycle, so it's not run by the beverage industry, but the beverage industry does have some stake in the game. They do have to pay for the cost of recycling of the type of beverage container choice they make. If it's aluminum, they don't pay anything because aluminum's got a high value. It's easily recyclable, and so they don't pay anything. But now if they put it into a number 6 kind of container or a number 7 type container that is not very recyclable or not at all, they are going to have to pay for that. And so they pay a small fee for that. So that's where that can come in, and we get somewhere in the middle. So there's currently 13 extended producer responsibility and product stewardship programs running in California right now. We are the most in the nation. We carry the most of these programs in the nation. And they are somewhere in that spectrum right there that you see.
So meaning there's 13 different forms of extended producer responsibility?
There's 13 different programs. So paint, carpet, and mattresses are 3 of them. We have e-waste. We have oil. We have agricultural pesticide containers. We have recalled products. We have pharmaceuticals. So if you are prescribed medications, or if you have over the counter, we call them OTCs. Those can go. You can take those back to a pharmacy in California. Most pharmacies will now have these bins where you can actually take your expired meds, your unwanted meds, and prescription or not, your OTCs, and put them into that bin, and then they will be shipped off to a plant that will burn them to nothing, so that they're no longer a threat. Because one of the biggest problems we had, and CPSC was the leading agency on this one as well, was during the opiate crisis is not ended. There are still a lot of folks that are overdosing from opiates. A lot of those opiates were coming out of the medicine cabinets of homes, or they were coming from, the grandson or the granddaughter was getting grandma or grandpa's medications and taking them and overdosing on them, having parties. They were having teen parties with all kinds of meds. They were calling them Skittles parties, which is just a scary name for something like that, where it could result in overdose deaths, which it has. Yeah. And so in an effort to fight that opiate epidemic, we started a program called Don't Rush to Flush, which is another one of our campaigns that started to put medicine collection bins in pharmacies, so that folks, when they had those medicines, they didn't have to keep them in their medicine cabinet and wonder what to do with them. They would take them and they would put them into these bins, and then they would be safely destroyed. And so it helped to reduce that risk. Well, in 2018, CPSC passed a bill in the legislature, SB 212, that required a pharmaceutical industry to pay for that collection system. So statewide, they are now having to pay for all the collection bins and the destruction of all the medications that they prescribe, or that come in as an over the counter. And then we also had a sharps component to that for the needles. For like the diabetics or anybody that's regularly having to use needles, they can get a safe return container, so they don't have to wonder how they get rid of their sharps, and so they don't put them in places they shouldn't go. And so those are more examples of where EPR, that's a true EPR program, where we've now held the pharmaceutical industry, a $250 billion a year net profit industry. We've held them accountable to take care of their end of life of their product. And then for the sharps, the same thing. They're not quite as big as pharma, but they have their products as well. And so that's where you can see that EPR can come in very handy to solve a lot of problems, including, helping with the opiate crisis.
I looked on your website and I saw that Don't Rush to Flush, and that also made me think about the danger of flushing and putting it into the septic system.
Oh, absolutely. So put it in the sewer. So here was one of the problems we were trying to try to deal with as well, because folks were encouraged by the FDA and others, to federal agencies, to flush your extra meds down the toilet, because that was quote unquote the safest way to get rid of them. Well, from an opiate overdose standpoint, it was. But here's the problem. All those medications that were being flushed down the toilet, the majority of them could not be taken out by the sewer treatment plants. They don't have the technology. They can't afford the technology in order to remove all those chemicals from the water. So they remove everything they have to in order to meet clean water standards for discharge into our open waters, but they can't get those out. So what we've seen a accumulation of these chemicals, of these pharmaceuticals in the aquatic life. And so we're seeing hormones, we're seeing all those things that we're getting flushed down, all those pills, or in those pills, getting flushed down the toilet, ending up in the rivers, streams, and out in the ocean, and being taken up by our aquatic life. Yeah.
And causing a whole other series of problems.
Exactly. So
well,
go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you to state out loud the website before we go to the next diagram.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And more conversation. Can you just say the website out loud for
absolutely.
radio?
Our website is calpsc.org. It's CAL, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie.org. So if you visit our website, we have a lot of information there. We have an info email address. If you have any questions, please just email us at info@calpsc.org. and we'll be happy to answer your questions. We're there to educate the public. That is part of our mission in life as a 501c3.
That's great. And we've got plenty of time. We'll say that again towards the end of the program. So the third diagram, DJ, can you put that up, please? That was
Yes.
a little more, that's a little more difficult for me to discern what that means.
so what I created this diagram for, and I use this in a lot of presentations, is this is how complicated it gets. And for your viewers that aren't seeing this visually, there are on the outside of think of an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and there's a lot of words on the paper here. On the outside is manufacturers, producers, retailers, and distributors, because those are the folks that are making the products and bringing them into the California marketplace. And then inside of that, of those four entities, is all the things that have to happen in order for extended producer responsibility and product stewardship to work. And so at the center of it, coming to the dead center of it, you have the consumers. The consumers, we are the folks that are getting these products and we're using them. And then when we're done with them, we're sending them out to either processors or recyclers. And those are the folks that are then taking it from us in our blue bins or recycle bins, or we're dropping it off at facilities such as landfills and transfer stations. And so they're taking it from there and deciding what to do with it. Now, mixed all around that, but still within the manufacturers, producers, retailers, and distributors, is all the things that have to happen in order to make the program work. And so you start with legislation when you have to, and we dictate who, if the program is going to be, for example, a product stewardship program where there's a visible fee, who should be running that program? Should it be the industry who is being regulated? So should the carpet industry run the carpet program when they're not paying into it? Or should it be someone else? Should it be an independent board who runs that? Because basically those visible fees we consider them to be public money, kind of like what we expect of our local governments and our state governments and our federal government. It is our tax dollars, in a sense, at work, and they should be controlled by someone who doesn't have a vested interest to manipulate things and make things, either make the program fail completely, not treat all the players in the market the same, maybe spreading out the costs evenly across all the different producers, even though they may be very different in their market share, but they have to bear the same amount of cost. That doesn't seem very fair. We also want to make sure that it's transparent as it can be. So we'll have like the IRS status. We want them to be a 501c3, certainly if it's public funds, because we want to be able to see it. Because when you get into the other IRS nonprofit status, you can have folks, entities hiding behind the information because they're not required by law to be transparent or as transparent. So we actually do dictate IRS status depending on what type of bill, what type of program is going to be run. Then we have things like our deposit systems. So who's like our CRV bottle bill, where you're paying 5 or 10 cents, and that's what funds that program and runs that program. And so that's kind of like a visible fee, but the consumer can actually get it back. It's not something you just pay for. It's gone. It's going to go pay for the recycling. You can actually get it back. But then it has its own issues with how that program is run, how effective it is. Because on a deposit system, if you had 100% effective deposit system and all the deposits were being returned, there's no money to run the program. And so then who pays for that program if it is running completely efficiently? Who pays for that? And that's where it gets into, okay, so do we have the consumers pay by only giving them a fraction, a smaller fraction of their deposit back, so maybe they get 8 cents out of 10 instead of the full 10 cents, so that there's there's 2 cents per bottle there to take care of the program itself? Or do we charge the producers? Do we say, okay, you guys are selling these products into the marketplace here in California, should you be paying into this to make sure that this program runs correctly and efficiently? And so you're picking up the tab when the deposit system is working really well. When it's not working as great, then you have the excess unclaimed deposits that would then be used to fund the program. So that's kind of where a deposit system comes in versus a visible fee. And then of course we always love to have the ever present internalized costs, which means the producers are absorbing all the costs and they're embedding into the cost of making their product and deciding how they're going to handle it. Another thing that's got to be part of the program is you got to have convenience standards. So you got to have convenient collection. If it's not convenient for the consumers to get rid of these products safely and efficiently, they're going to dump them in the trash can, or they're going to dump them in the recycle bin. And so
Sadly, that's true.
And so we want to make sure that there's convenience standards in there. And so, matter of fact, another bill that we just got off the floor and has now been being presented to the governor is our battery bill. So we ran AB 2440 this year. That is a true EPR bill, what I've been describing, where it's going to be the producers of household batteries. So all your loose batteries and your detachable batteries for your power tools and other things where the battery you can remove it as a consumer. All those batteries will be collected by the battery industry with a product stewardship organization running the program. And it'll all be done at the battery industry's cost. And what we put in there is we put in a convenience standard that there will be 10 collection locations per county at a minimum, plus there'll be one collection center for every 15,000 people. So after you get past that first 10, you're adding on more collection. So imagine how many with 10 million people in the LA basin area, for example, how many collection points that are going to be required in order to meet that convenience standard. And they have to be appropriately geographically spread. So they can't just put all of them, like for example, the city of San Francisco, they can't put them all in one district and call it that good. They actually have to make sure there's a convenient spread of these collection points all over San Francisco so that all the consumers have good and convenient access to the program. And so that's kind of where this graphic comes in. It kind of just covers the complexity that we think about when we're working on these bills to make sure that all the parties are being held accountable, including the consumers, because the consumers play a part in this as well. They have to help. They can't just say, okay, I'm going to throw it in the garbage can and then let somebody else take it out. Well, it doesn't work that way. They have to put it in the right place. That means they take their batteries back to their CVS or their Costco or wherever they buy their batteries. And if there's a collection bin there, they're taking them back and they're depositing their batteries in that proper place so they could be properly handled rather than throwing them in the recycle bin or in the garbage can.
Wow. So what do you think is the best way to not only educate consumers about the right way or the convenient spots or the locations but like what kind of marketing or campaigning do you do to not just educate the public about look at these great ways you can help, but to like do it? I mean, I know you can't enforce it upon us consumers, at least not that I'm aware of, but so how do you like put incentive under consumers?
So we do it a couple of ways. Like I mentioned, our Refill Your Fun campaign, we started back in 2015. And so one of the parts of that actually was developed through grants from CalRecycle. CalRecycle is the state agency that runs monitors and regulates the solid waste industry in California to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing and not doing bad things. And so CalRecycle puts out these grants each year. And CPSC has been fortunate enough to partner up with jurisdictions, cities and counties up and down the state, and joint powers authorities and districts to get some of these grants. And we've actually spent over, we've had 30 grants. So we're probably getting close to $2 million in grant funding over the last 7 years to educate the public and get the refillable propane cylinders, just for one example, into the hands of the consumers, because that's the way you educate folks to say, look, how convenient this is. Now you can go over to your Ace Hardware and you can just exchange this for another cylinder filled with gas. You can go to your U-Haul and you can get it refilled for $2. You can go fill up your barbecue cylinder, and then if you buy an adapter online for $15, and you can safely refill that meant to be refilled cylinder, the refillable cylinder. You can refill it safely so you don't blow yourself up or maim yourself, which has happened, unfortunately. And so we're trying to get the folks to understand this is the much better option. It's safer for you. It's safer for the environment. It's the right thing to do. And so that's how we approach all of these products. We try to make sure that folks understand there's a better way to do these things. Don't just look at it as how convenient is it for you, but think about the bigger picture, and should you be doing what you're doing when there are better alternatives out there? And what will happen, what we'll see, and what we're going to see with our bill for the propane cylinder ban on the single-use cylinders, which, by the way, doesn't take effect for 5 years. So there's a 5-year transition period to ban the sale of single-use cylinders in California. So effective January 1 of 2028, they will no longer be sold in California. But is to get the folks just to understand that, you know, they have the time to make that switch, but it's going to bring competition for the refillables into the market to drive the price down, to make it more price parity with the single use that are the bad product to begin with. And so we're going to see that helping the whole situation.
Yeah, bringing in the competition.
And then that all rolls back into why is this important for climate change, which is kind of where we were before, which is if we can not make the products, if we can make them last longer, if we can make them repairable so we don't have to replace them, or if we can recycle them properly so that we don't have to mine natural resources to make more of those products, because the ones that aren't recyclable are ending up in the landfill where they'll never be used again. All that affects our climate and what we're doing for emissions. And so this is where it comes back to what we call the circular economy, which is you make that product, you put it into use, it's used. It's then either, if it has to come back out of the system as a usable product, it's 100% recycled. This is the dream world. It's 100% recycled. And then all the materials that were recycled out of that product go back in to make that product again. And that's what the true circular economy is. And so that's the newest and latest, greatest buzzword for trying to paint that picture of a better environment for everybody by make sure everything's circular rather than linear, which is where we've been for a long time. Linear economy, where we use the product and we throw it away and it goes in the landfill.
I love that circular economy. Wow. I have to say this, this might sound out of context, but not really. I'm just thinking of a circular economy experience when I lived in Nepal for 3 years in the Peace Corps, how it was just amazing to see that, like, no trash was generated. There was no trash. There were no trash cans in the villages at that time. And for instance, people would make plates out of banana leaves, and they would use little pieces of stem to, like, fold up the leaves and pin them together. So you could even have a bowl, and then you just compost them afterwards. And then the compost feeds the new banana trees. It was just wild, you know, coming from such a consuming society to go to a place where, like, wow, there was very, very little to no trash in some of the rural villages at that time. And I
Absolutely.
just love
and that's a key point, because we in America, we generate somewhere between 5 to 10 pounds of trash a day, every one of us. And you imagine how much that stacks up for just an individual household, how much that can be at the end of a year. And then you look at other countries, European Union, they're way farther ahead than we are, but they're still generating trash, and they have waste energy facilities that burn up the materials they can't recycle. You look in Japan, where they sort for 200 different materials before the material goes to landfill or to incineration or to waste energy. Then you look at, like, your experience in Nepal, where they don't even generate it to begin with, because one, they can't afford to, and they're not a consumeristic society like we are. Our capitalist system has created a lot of wonderful things, but it created a lot of bad things along with it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned other countries and what they're doing in Europe. And I know you mentioned that some of the, like, where's Canada? Like some of the ideas came from some programs that they're already running in Canada.
Absolutely. So we actually host a legislative study trip each year, California, the CPSC, along with our partners in crime, National Stewardship Action Council, and the organizer of the trip, which is the California Foundation for the Economy and the Environment. We host this joint venture where we go up to Canada, for example, and look at their EPR and product stewardship programs and learn what we can from the best of it, learn what we shouldn't do, because their programs are not perfect either. And they learn from us. And so because California has the most EPR and product stewardship laws on the books of any state in the United States, we're on par with Canada and all their programs. And so we're trying to learn from each other. And what we have found is that it's very different from province to province. Vancouver, British Columbia could be very different from Toronto in Ontario versus Montreal and Quebec. They all have very different programs, and they have some very similar programs, kind of like we do here in America. But their drive to not have the issues that we experience is different, and they just have they have a little different political will than we do. They don't deal with quite the lobbying efforts that we deal with, or what our legislators deal with at the state or federal level. And so it makes a big difference. And so we try to show that with the legislators we take there to educate them on EPR and product stewardship.
God, that is so great. And so California's on par with some of the programs, some parts of Canada?
I would say we are on par. We are on par with some. We are better than they are at some, and we are worse than they are at some. I think it's a mix when you look at all their different programs across the whole of Canada versus what's in California.
So I'm sure somebody's like, you must have like your tracking data, right? And,
absolutely. Yeah.
And is there a place on your website or through contacting you? Because I'd love to hear numbers about, like, just to inspire us about how much of a difference it will make when, like, all these efforts that you're doing and all these programs, and to encourage people to play our part. Speaking as a consumer, I don't know if you know any off the top of your head, or if you can tell us where to find the sort of the tracking. And I know some things are not in effect yet, but
right.
What about numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have some of that data on our website. If not, I certainly have it for background for legislative bills we've run that talk about all those issues. And so that we can we have to quantify it. We have to quantify the problem for the legislators in order for them to show interest in wanting to run a bill.
For sure. Great. We just have a couple minutes left. Do you want to say the website again, please, and how people can contact you through email, and then any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Absolutely. So the website is www.C as in Charlie, A, L as in Larry, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie.org. So calpsc.org. And then if you want to email us, you just add an info in front of that, info@calpsc.org, and you get a hold of us that way. And then closing thoughts, I'm grateful that I had this opportunity to talk to you and your audience. One of our core missions is educate the general public. And so anytime we can get out there and talk about what we do and what we're trying to accomplish, it's always a great opportunity for us and to help educate the public.
Thank you. I so appreciate everything the California Product Stewardship Council is doing, all these efforts and all the networks you belong to. So thank you, Doug Kobold. Really appreciate your time. And definitely this will be a link I'll share with many people so they can learn about all these efforts. I also want to thank DJ, our engineer, for all your help in the background there, and our producer, Dean Piper. And I'd love to thank all of our listeners and viewers for being here and helping spread the word on these great solutions. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to Talk 4 TV or W4CY Radio to listen live, or look for the podcast later on all the major platforms. You can find It's Your Voice. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech